is The Chris Abraham Show.
Hey there, this is a quick Season 8, Episode 10. All it is basically is the deep dive from Google Notebook LM, a deep dive of the episode 1722 of No Agenda Show. This actually happened, which is basically an episode that is a collection of clips. I think it's a part 1 of 2, a collection of clips taken during COVID. It is a huge collection of hours of, hours of clips that were taken during the COVID epidemic. And most of them are very controversial and very edgy. So I thought all I would do is kind of throw up the entire MP3 to Google Notebook LM and let them do one of those crazy AI deep dives and see what they're going to say. I think it's going to be very amusing. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to The Chris Abraham Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time.
Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at a collection of audio snippets from the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's really amazing to hear how these snippets capture those early days.
Yeah.
You know, that confusion, the uncertainty,
Right.
the race for the vaccine, all those societal shifts that happened.
Yeah, and it's all here in these raw, unfiltered voices. So
Exactly.
where should we begin?
Let's start with the early days.
Okay.
The early days of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Remember the confusion surrounding testing?
Well, yeah.
We have a snippet from December 2020.
Okay.
Adam Curry talks about having leftover COVID-19 test.
Wow.
It seems so trivial now.
Right.
But at that time, access to testing was a major
Oh, yeah. A huge point of anxiety.
point of anxiety and uncertainty.
A lot of unknowns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that uncertainty fueled a lot of anxiety
Right.
and contributed to the spread of misinformation. We also have a snippet from a police officer
Okay.
talking about enforcing stay-at-home orders,
Wow.
breaking up gatherings. The lockdown measures were incredibly strict.
Yeah, they were.
And there was a real sense of urgency in enforcing them.
It's a stark contrast to that PSA we have about, don't start a podcast.
Right.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's interesting how humor emerged as a coping mechanism during the pandemic. It provided a brief respite from that constant barrage of information
Yeah.
and anxiety. And speaking of controversy,
Oh, boy.
remember the heated debates surrounding hydroxychloroquine?
Oh, yeah.
We have snippets of doctors passionately advocating for its use,
Wow.
while the FDA issued warnings about potential side effects
Right.
and the lack of conclusive evidence supporting its effectiveness against COVID-19.
It was a prime example of how the pandemic became a battleground for different medical opinions.
Yeah.
Wasn't it the off-label use of hydroxychloroquine?
Right.
Meaning it wasn't officially approved for COVID-19 treatment.
Right.
Just muddied the waters even more.
Absolutely.
It just created even more hesitancy and distrust
Yes.
among the public.
This wasn't just a debate about a specific drug.
Right.
It became symbolic of a much larger struggle. People were grappling with the lack of definitive answers
Right.
and clear guidance. And that uncertainty created fertile ground for conspiracy theories to emerge.
That brings us to the 5G conspiracy theory.
Oh, yes.
A prime example of how fear and misinformation can intertwine.
Right.
One soundbite directly links the rollout of 5G technology
Yeah.
with the pandemic and ensuing lockdowns.
Wow.
It's a pretty wild leap.
While the theory lacks any scientific basis,
Right.
it's important to understand why it gained traction. Some people were genuinely concerned about potential health effects
Yeah.
of 5G,
Right, it was new.
a relatively new technology that emits invisible waves.
Yeah.
Others may have been distrustful of government or authority figures
Right.
and sought alternative explanations for the pandemic's origins
Yeah.
and those sudden societal changes.
It wasn't just about the technology itself. It tapped into anxieties about control surveillance and that rapid pace of technological change.
Exactly. And those anxieties often thrive in the absence of clear, reliable information.
Right.
Unfortunately, the pandemic was a breeding ground for misinformation,
Yes.
which further eroded trust in institutions and experts.
And that leads us to Dr. Fauci.
Ah, yes, Dr. Fauci.
He became so incredibly polarizing,
And did.
hailed as a hero by some, vilified by others.
Yes, we have sound bites that capture both sides of this debate.
Yes, we do.
Some view him as a voice of reason,
Yeah.
a steady guide amidst the chaos.
Right.
Others accuse him of misleading the public,
Yeah.
and even link him back to the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Which I found particularly surprising.
The intensity of those accusations is striking.
Yeah, it is.
It reflects a deep distrust of authority figures,
Right.
particularly those in the scientific community.
Yeah.
This distrust was often fueled by misinformation and, unfortunately, by political agenda.
It's hard to separate fact from fiction when things are so politicized.
Absolutely. Remember, the pandemic became deeply politicized.
It did.
Making it incredibly difficult to separate fact from fiction.
So how do we make sense of these conflicting narratives surrounding figures like Dr. Fauci?
Well,
Was it simply a matter of different interpretations of the same information?
it's complex.
Or was there something more at play?
It's a complex issue. People were scared
Right.
and looking for answers
Yeah.
at a rapidly evolving situation.
Of course.
When those answers weren't readily available or when they were presented in a way that felt conflicting or confusing,
Right.
it became easier to grasp onto narratives that fit pre-existing beliefs
Right.
or align with certain political affiliations.
So the pandemic became a mirror,
Yeah.
reflecting our own biases and anxieties.
That's a very insightful observation.
Back at us. We saw what we wanted to see,
Yeah.
often filtering information through those pre-existing lenses.
And this tendency towards selective perception and confirmation bias
Right.
made it even harder to have productive conversations
Of course.
about how to address the pandemic. We were talking past each other,
Right.
not with each other, and that lack of genuine dialogue
Right.
further fueled division and distrust.
Okay, so we've talked about the initial confusion, the controversies, the emergence of conspiracy theories.
Right.
But what about the tangible impact of the pandemic on people's lives?
Yes.
The lockdowns, for instance.
Yes, the economic toll was immense.
Yeah, it
We have
wasn't-
snippets about businesses closing, people losing their jobs.
Right.
And the mental health struggles.
Yeah.
That resulted from the isolation and uncertainty.
Of course.
The pandemic also exacerbated existing inequalities.
Right.
As minority communities were disproportionately affected
Yes.
by the virus and its economic fallout.
We even have a snippet about the struggles of strip clubs
Oh, yeah.
trying to reopen
Interesting.
under strict regulations.
Yeah.
It's a rather unconventional example,
It is.
but it highlights how the pandemic disrupted industry
Absolutely.
and livelihoods that many people might not immediately think about.
It's a reminder that the pandemic's impact
Yeah.
extended far beyond the realm of public health.
Right.
It permeated every aspect of our lives,
Right.
from the personal to the societal,
Yes.
from the economic to the cultural.
Yeah.
And these ripple effects are still being felt today.
It's almost like the pandemic served as a massive societal stress test,
Yeah.
revealing both our strengths and weaknesses,
That's a powerful way to put it.
our capacity for resilience,
Yeah.
and our vulnerabilities.
And understanding those strengths and weaknesses is essential.
Right.
As we move forward, we need to learn from both the successes and failures of our pandemic response
Yeah.
to build a more resilient and equitable future.
It makes you wonder how much of this disruption will have a lasting impact.
Right.
Will we ever go back to what we considered normal? Or has the pandemic fundamentally altered the way we live and interact with each other?
That's a question we're all grappling with. The pandemic has undoubtedly accelerated some trends, like the shift towards remote work
Sure.
and the increasing reliance on technology.
Right.
But it's also sparked conversations about the need for more robust social safety nets,
Yeah.
more equitable access to healthcare,
Right.
and a greater appreciation for the interconnectedness of our world.
It seems like the pandemic, for all its challenges and hardships,
Yeah.
has also presented us with an opportunity for reflection and growth.
Yes,
We've been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our societies,
it has.
but we've also witnessed incredible acts of compassion, innovation, and resilience.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The pandemic has been a collective trauma, but it's also been a catalyst.
Right.
It's pushed us to re-examine our priorities,
Yeah.
to question our assumptions,
Yeah.
and to imagine new possibilities for the future.
So amidst all this uncertainty and upheaval,
Yeah.
did any glimmer of hope emerge?
One of the most significant developments was the incredibly rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah.
We have snippets about Operation Warp Speed,
Right.
the unprecedented effort to accelerate vaccine development, and the role of figures like Bill Gates.
Yeah.
It was a remarkable scientific achievement, but even this beacon of hope was met with hesitancy
Right.
and distrust by some.
Right. We hear concerns about potential side effects. So the two-dose regimen, and of course those persistent conspiracy theories about microchip tracking.
Of course.
It seems that even in the face of a potential solution,
Right.
Those underlying anxieties about technology and control didn't disappear.
The speed of vaccine development,
Right.
while impressive,
Yeah.
also fueled mistrust among some.
Of course.
People were understandably wary of something that seemed to appear so quickly,
Right.
especially in the midst of so much conflicting information and political posturing.
It underscores how important it is to address those anxieties.
Yes.
And to build trust in scientific processes and institutions.
Yeah.
If people don't feel confident in the information they're receiving,
Right.
they're more likely to cling to alternative explanation, even if those explanations are unfounded.
Transparency, clear communication,
Yeah.
and a willingness to engage with people's concerns
Yeah.
are all essential for building that trust.
Right.
And that trust is vital, not only for addressing vaccine hesitancy,
Right.
but for navigating future public health challenges.
So we've seen how the pandemic unfolded,
Yeah.
how it sparked confusion and controversy, how it exacerbated existing anxieties and inequalities.
Yes.
But how did it intersect with the political landscape?
Mhm.
We've got a whole set of sound bites about Trump's handling of the pandemic,
Yeah.
the debates over masks and lockdowns, and the accusations of misinformation flying back and forth.
It's a clear illustration of how a public health crisis
Yeah.
can become deeply intertwined with politics.
Yeah.
The pandemic became a partisan battleground,
It did.
with each side using it to score points
Right.
and advance their own agendas.
Yeah. We even hear contrasting portrayals of Governors Cuomo and DeSantis.
Interesting.
Their actions and decisions filtered through very different lenses.
Yeah.
It's almost as if people were seeing what they wanted to see.
Right.
Their interpretations shaped by their pre-existing political beliefs.
That's
too.
a key point. The pandemic became a Rorschach test
It did?
for our political ideologies.
Yeah.
We saw what we wanted to see, and our interpretations were often shaped by our pre-existing biases and affiliations.
Of course.
This made it incredibly difficult
Yeah.
to have productive, nuanced conversations
Of course.
about how to best address the pandemic.
So instead of uniting against a common threat,
Right.
the pandemic seemed to further divide us
Unfortunately, that's what we're seeing in these snippets.
along partisan lines.
The pandemic became a wedge issue, exacerbating existing political
It did.
and making it even harder to find common ground.
And this polarization wasn't limited to national politics.
No.
We see it playing out in communities, families, even workplaces.
Right.
It's as if the pandemic exposed fault lines that were already present in our society
Yeah.
and then widened them.
Absolutely. It heightened existing tensions fueled by misinformation, fear, and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And these divisions made it even more challenging
Of course.
to implement effective public health measures
Right.
and to foster a sense of collective responsibility.
Yeah, it seems like we're starting to see how interconnected all of these aspects of the pandemic truly are.
They are.
It wasn't just a health crisis.
Yeah.
It was a social crisis,
No.
an economic crisis,
Yeah.
a political crisis all rolled into one.
Exactly. And to truly understand the pandemic's impact,
Yeah.
we need to look at it through all these different lenses.
Right.
It's a complex, multifaceted event
Yeah.
that continues to shape our world today.
Okay, we've laid a lot of groundwork here exploring the initial confusion, the controversies, the impact on individuals and society, and the politicization of the pandemic.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
Well, one crucial aspect we haven't delved into yet is the intersection of the pandemic with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay.
We have some powerful sound bites that capture the tension between social justice and
Yeah.
the risks and the moral imperatives involved in protesting during a global health crisis.
It's a reminder that even amidst a global pandemic, other social and political issues don't simply vanish.
They don't.
They continue to simmer,
Right.
sometimes even boiling over.
They do.
And the pandemic often acted as an accelerant, bringing these issues to the forefront.
It's a complex and often heartbreaking reality.
Yeah.
The pandemic didn't occur in a vacuum.
Right.
It collided with pre-existing social and political movements,
Right.
often amplifying their urgency while also creating new challenges and dilemmas.
So in a way, the pandemic forced us to confront multiple crises simultaneously.
Yes, it did.
It was a convergence of challenges that demanded our attention
Right.
and forced us to grapple with difficult questions about equity, justice, and the role of government in protecting both individual rights and public health.
Exactly. And navigating those complexities wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't.
It required a nuanced understanding of the interplay between these different crises and a willingness to engage in difficult conversations
Right.
about how to balance competing needs and priorities.
Speaking of difficult conversations,
Yes.
the pandemic also raised a lot of questions about the role of technology,
Right.
particularly in the context of surveillance and contact tracing.
Of course.
We have snippets about the Australian COVID app,
Right.
and even those somewhat unsettling images of police drones
Oh, wow.
being used to enforce lockdowns.
The pandemic certainly accelerated the use of technology
Yeah, it did.
for both beneficial
Yeah.
and potentially concerning purposes.
All right.
Contact tracing apps, for instance,
Yeah.
offered a way to track the spread of the virus
Right.
and potentially slow down outbreaks. But they also raised valid concerns about privacy
Of course.
and the potential for government overreach.
It's a classic double-edged sword. On the one hand, you have the potential to utilize technology to safeguard public health.
Right.
On the other hand, you have the potential for misuse and the erosion of individual liberties.
It's a delicate balance, and the pandemic forced us to confront those trade-offs
Yes.
in a very real way.
Yeah, it did.
We had to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
how much are we willing to sacrifice in the name of safety?
Right.
Where do we draw the line between protecting public health and protecting individual rights?
It's a debate that continues to this day. And it's not just about government surveillance.
Right.
We even have a snippet about a robot
A robot.
enforcing mask wearing in a store.
Wow.
It's a bit quirky,
It is.
but it points to the increasing role of automation and surveillance in our daily lives,
Right.
a trend that the pandemic undoubtedly accelerated.
It's a reminder that the technological landscape is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has pushed us further down a path of increased reliance on technology for everything from communication and commerce to healthcare and security.
So how do we ensure that technology is used responsibly and ethically
Wow.
in the wake of the pandemic?
That's a question that requires careful consideration
Yeah.
and ongoing dialogue. We need to establish clear guidelines for the ethical use of technology,
Right.
particularly when it comes to data collection and surveillance.
Right.
We also need to ensure that individuals have a voice in how these technologies are developed and deployed.
It's about finding that balance
It is.
between innovation and responsibility,
Exactly.
between progress and protection.
We can't simply surrender our privacy and autonomy in the name of safety.
No, we can't.
We need to be vigilant,
Right.
to demand transparency,
Yeah.
and to advocate for policies that protect our fundamental rights in the digital age.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the initial confusion, the emergent conspiracy theories, the devastating impacts on individuals and society, the politicization of the pandemic, and the intersection of this global health crisis with other social and political movements. Where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
I think it's essential to recognize that the pandemic wasn't just a singular event. It was a catalyst,
Right.
a disruptor,
Yeah.
an accelerant of existing trends.
Right.
It exposed vulnerabilities in our systems, amplified existing inequalities, and forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our world.
It seems like the pandemic was a turning point in history,
It was.
a moment that irrevocably altered the trajectory
Yes,
of our societies and our lives.
that's a powerful observation.
And as we move forward,
Yes,
it's crucial to reflect on the lessons learned,
it is.
to acknowledge the losses and the resilience,
Yes,
and to use this experience as an opportunity
yes.
to build a more just equitable and sustainable.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now.
Yeah.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground.
We have.
And it's important to take some time to process all this
Okay.
and reflect on its implications.
Sounds good.
We'll pick up the conversation in part 2, where we'll delve deeper into the pandemic's lasting legacy
That's right.
and explore the challenges and opportunities
Looking forward to it.
that lie ahead.
Until then,
Yes.
we encourage you to keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring. The journey of understanding the pandemic and its implications is far from over. It's an ongoing process of discovery, reflection, and action.
I agree with you.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
See you then. Welcome back to our deep dive into the COVID-19 pandemic. We left off talking about how the pandemic intersected with social and political movement.
Right, and how it forced society to really grapple with multiple crises
Exactly.
at once.
Yeah.
One of the areas I'm particularly interested in is the long-term impact on public health.
Yeah, that's important.
We talked about the immediate threat of the virus, but what about those lingering consequences?
That's a crucial point. The pandemic's effects extend far beyond those initial wave infections. We're now seeing the rise of long COVID, a condition that can cause a wide range of debilitating symptoms long after that initial infection.
Some of the sound bites we have are just really eye-opening.
Yeah.
People describe experiencing fatigue, brain fog, difficulty breathing.
Wow.
Months, even years after having COVID.
It's crazy.
It really highlights how much we still don't know
We don't.
about this virus and its long-term effects.
It's a sobering reminder that the pandemic isn't over just because case numbers have gone down.
Right.
The virus can have a lasting impact on people's health and well-being, and the full extent of those consequences is still unfolding.
And it's not just physical health that's been affected.
No.
The pandemic's also had a profound impact on mental health.
Absolutely.
We've heard about the rise in anxiety, depression,
Of course.
and even post-traumatic stress disorder related to the pandemic.
The isolation, fear, the uncertainty, the grief,
Yeah.
all of these factors toll on people's mental well-being, and it's not just individually.
Right.
The pandemic has also strained our mental health systems,
Yeah.
which were already stretched thin before the crisis hit.
It's a reminder that we need to really prioritize mental health
We do.
as we move forward.
Right.
We need to provide adequate support for those who are struggling and invest in building, more resilient mental health care.
Couldn't agree more. Mental health is just as important as physical health,
Right.
and it needs to be treated with the same level of care and attention.
Okay, so we've talked about the pandemic's impact on public health, both physical and mental, but what about its broader societal effects?
Yeah.
One of the most striking things has been the way it's exposed and exacerbated existing inequalities.
Absolutely. The pandemic didn't affect everyone equally.
Right.
Minority communities, essential workers, people living in poverty.
Right.
These groups were disproportionately affected by the virus and its economic fallout.
We have a snippet about the impact of school closures
Oh, yeah.
on low-income families, and it really brings to light the challenges that many parents face trying to balance work childcare and their children's education
Right.
amidst all the uncertainty and disruption.
It's a stark reminder that access to resources, healthcare, and support systems played a significant role
Right.
in determining how people fared during the pandemic. Those who were already vulnerable were often hit the hardest.
And these disparities didn't just emerge during the pandemic.
No, they didn't.
They were already present in our society.
Right.
The pandemic simply magnified them,
Exactly.
bringing those systemic inequities into sharper focus.
It's a crucial point. The pandemic served as a harsh reminder of those deep-seated inequalities
Yeah.
that exist in our society
Right.
and the urgent need to address them.
Yeah.
We can't simply ignore these issues or pretend they'll go away on their own.
No.
We need to actively work towards creating a more just and equitable society
Yeah.
where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So in a way, the pandemic has given us a chance to kind of reevaluate our priorities
Yeah.
and to build back better, to create a society that's more resilient,
Yes.
more inclusive, and more just.
Exactly. It's an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of the past, to acknowledge the systemic failures that were exposed during the pandemic,
Right.
and to work towards creating a better future for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the pandemic's impact on public health and society.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the role of government during this crisis.
Okay.
We've heard about the lockdowns, the mask mandates, the vaccine rollouts.
Right.
These were all unprecedented measures,
They were.
and they sparked a lot of debate.
Governments around the world were faced with an incredibly difficult situation. They had to make decisions quickly, often with limited information and under immense pressure.
Yeah, it's a really tough spot to be in.
It was. It was a real test of leadership, and we saw a wide range of responses, some more effective than others.
We have a snippet of a government official defending the decision to implement lockdowns, arguing that it was necessary to slow the spread of the virus and prevent hospitals from being overwhelmed.
Right.
But we also hear from people who felt that the lockdowns were an overreach of government power
Yes.
and infringed on individual liberties.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it?
It is.
How do you balance the need to protect public health with the need to protect individual rights?
Right.
There's no easy answer.
No.
And the pandemic really forced us to grapple with these fundamental questions about the role of government in our lives.
Some argued that the government has a responsibility to take decisive action
Yeah.
to protect its citizens, even if those actions are unpopular or restrict individual freedoms.
Of course.
Others felt that the government should have a more limited role,
Right.
focusing on providing information and guidance while allowing individuals to make their own choices about how to manage their risk.
It's a debate that reflects different values and priorities, different understandings of the balance between individual liberty and collective responsibility.
Right.
And it's a debate that will likely continue long after the pandemic is over.
So how do we even evaluate the government's response to the pandemic? What were the successes and where were the missteps?
I think it's important to acknowledge the unprecedented nature of the situation.
Right.
Governments were dealing with a novel virus with limited information and rapidly evolving circumstances.
Right.
There were bound to be mistakes made along the way.
We hear about the confusion surrounding testing early on, the mixed messaging about masks, the challenges with vaccine distribution.
Right.
These were all real problems that had real consequences.
It's crucial to hold our leaders accountable for those missteps.
Yeah.
But it's also important to recognize the immense pressure they were under.
Right.
And the difficult choices they had to make.
It's easy to judge in hindsight.
It is.
But at the time, no one had all the answers.
Yeah.
Everyone was learning as we went along, including those in positions of power.
Right. And that uncertainty made it even more challenging to navigate the pandemic.
Yeah.
We were all in uncharted territory trying to make the best decisions possible with what we had at the time.
So how do we learn from this experience?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that we're better prepared for the next pandemic?
Right.
Because let's face it, this probably won't be the last one we face.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think there are several key takeaways from the pandemic that can inform our future preparedness efforts.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the things we should be?
First and foremost, we need to invest in public health infrastructure. That means strengthening our disease surveillance systems, expanding our laboratory capacity, and ensuring that we have a well-trained and adequately resourced public health workforce.
So it's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly.
We need to be prepared to detect and respond to outbreaks quickly and effectively before they have a chance to spread widely.
Exactly. We also need to strengthen global cooperation and coordination. Pandemics don't respect borders.
Right.
We need to work together as a global community to share information resources and best practices.
It's about recognizing that our health and well-being are interconnected.
Yes.
What happens in one part of the world can quickly impact other parts of the world.
Absolutely. We also need to address the underlying factors that make pandemics more likely, such as climate change, deforestation, and the wildlife trade.
So it's not just about responding to pandemics when they occur.
Yeah.
It's about addressing the root causes that make them more likely in the first place.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic approach to pandemic preparedness, one that recognizes the complex interplay between human health, environmental health, and global.
It's a tall order.
It is.
But it's essential if we want to create a safer and healthier future for ourselves and future generations.
It's a challenge that demands our attention and action. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a wake-up call, a reminder that we are all vulnerable to these global threats.
Yeah.
And that we need to work together to mitigate.
Okay, we've talked about the lessons learned and the need for better preparedness, but let's not forget the human element of this story.
Of course not.
You know, we've heard about the fear, the loss, the uncertainty, but we've also heard about incredible acts of courage, compassion, and resilience.
Absolutely. The pandemic brought out the best in many people. We saw healthcare workers putting their lives on the line to care for the sick.
Right.
We saw essential workers keeping our societies functioning despite the risks. We saw communities coming together to support those in need.
We even have a snippet about a group of volunteers who organized a food bank
Oh, wow. That's great.
to help families struggling with food insecurity during the lockdown.
That's wonderful.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope in humanity shining through.
It's important to acknowledge and celebrate those acts of kindness and compassion.
Yeah.
They remind us that we're not alone in this,
We're not.
that we can get through tough times by supporting each other.
So in the midst of all this suffering and loss, there were also stories of resilience, of community of hope.
Exactly. The pandemic tested us in profound ways.
It did.
But it also revealed our capacity for empathy, for innovation, and for collective action.
And those qualities will be essential as we move forward.
You will.
We'll need to draw on our resilience, our creativity, and our sense of community to rebuild and reimagine our world in the wake of the pandemic.
Agreed. The pandemic has been a defining moment in our history, a moment of profound challenge and change.
It has.
But it's also been a moment of opportunity, a chance to reflect on our values, to reevaluate our priorities, and to work towards creating a more just equitable and sustainable.
Well said.
Yeah.
It seems like we've reached a natural point to pause and reflect on everything we've discussed so far. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
And it's important to take some time to process these complex issues and consider their implications for our lives and our world.
Agreed. We'll pick up the conversation in part 3,
Okay.
where we'll delve into the pandemic's lasting legacy and explore the path forward.
Until then, we encourage you to keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring. The journey of understanding the pandemic and its impact is far from over. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
We've explored the impact on public health,
Yeah.
the societal shifts, the role of government,
Right.
and even glimpsed those moments of resilience
Right.
and human connection.
It's been quite a journey
It has.
through a turbulent period in history.
Yeah.
One that's reshaped our world in profound ways. And as we delve into the pandemic's lasting legacy,
Okay.
I'm particularly struck by how it's redefined our relationship with trust.
That's an interesting angle. We talked about the erosion of trust
Right.
in institutions and experts
Yeah.
throughout our conversation. But how has that played out in the bigger picture?
Well, the pandemic coincided with the rise of social media
Yeah.
and the spread of misinformation on a massive scale. It became increasingly difficult to discern facts from fiction. And that had a corrosive effect on trust. People lost faith in traditional sources of information.
Right.
Whether it was government agencies, scientific experts, or even the news media.
We have some sound bites that really capture this sense of disillusionment.
Yeah.
People talk about feeling betrayed by institutions they once trusted,
Wow.
questioning the motives of those in power and grappling with just a profound sense of uncertainty.
It's unsettling.
It is.
It highlights the fragility of trust in a digital age where information, both accurate and inaccurate,
Right.
can spread like wildfire. The pandemic became a breeding ground for conspiracy, fueled by fear, uncertainty, and a lack of clear, consistent messaging from trusted.
Some might argue that this erosion of trust was already underway before the pandemic,
Yeah,
that social media and political polarization had already begun to kind of chip away at those foundations.
that's a valid point. The pandemic didn't create these issues out of thin air, but it certainly accelerated them, acting as a catalyst that exposed the cracks in our societal fabric and widened the divides.
So how do we even begin to rebuild trust in a world where information is so fragmented and contested?
Right.
It feels like a monumental task.
It won't be easy, but it's essential for a functioning society.
Right.
We need to start by addressing the underlying issues that contributed to this erosion of trust. That means tackling misinformation, promoting media literacy, and fostering greater transparency and accountability from.
We need to equip people with the tools to critically evaluate information,
Yes,
to recognize bias and manipulation,
Yeah.
and to seek out credible sources.
absolutely.
It's about empowering individuals to navigate this complex information landscape with discernment and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Exactly. And institutions need to step up as well.
Right.
They need to be more transparent about their decision-making processes, more accountable for their actions, and more responsive to the needs and concerns of the communities they serve.
It's about rebuilding those lines of communication,
Sure.
fostering genuine dialogue, and demonstrating a commitment to serving the public good.
Right.
Trust is earned, not given, and it requires ongoing effort and a willingness to listen and learn from past mistakes.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not just about rebuilding trust in institutions.
Right.
It's also about rebuilding trust in each other.
Yeah.
The pandemic often pitted people against each other, fueling division and animosity. We need to find ways to bridge those divides, to foster empathy and understanding, and to rediscover our shared humanity.
So it's about moving beyond that us versus them mentality
Yeah,
that often characterizes these debates.
it is.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that we all have a stake in creating a society where trust and cooperation can flourish.
Precisely. It's about fostering a sense of collective responsibility, recognizing that our individual actions have consequences for the well-being of others and for the health of our communities.
Okay, we've talked about the erosion of trust and the challenges of rebuilding it.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the pandemic's impact on the future.
Okay.
What are some of the lasting changes we might see in the years to come?
The pandemic has accelerated a number of trends that were already underway. For example, remote work has become much more,
Right.
and it's likely to remain a significant part of the workforce even after the pandemic subsides.
We've also seen a rapid adoption of telehealth, with virtual doctor's appointments becoming increasingly common.
Yes.
It's a trend that's likely to continue as technology improves and people become more comfortable with receiving healthcare remotely.
Absolutely. And then there's the impact on education. Online learning has become a necessity for many, and while it's had its challenges, it's also forced us to rethink traditional models of education and explore new possibilities for blended learning and personalized instruction.
It seems like the pandemic has forced us to be more adaptable,
It has.
more innovative, and more willing to embrace change.
Yes.
We've been pushed out of our comfort zones, and that's led to some unexpected breakthroughs and a reevaluation of long-held assumptions.
It's certainly been a catalyst for disruption, both positive and negative.
Right.
But as we move forward, we have an opportunity to harness those lessons,
Yeah.
to build on the innovations that emerged during the pandemic, and to create a future that's more resilient, more equitable, and more sustainable.
So while the pandemic has undoubtedly been a time of immense challenge and hardship, it's also presented us with an opportunity for growth and transformation. We can choose to emerge from this experience stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before.
That's a powerful message of hope. To end on the pandemic has been a defining moment in our history, a moment that's tested our limits, exposed our vulnerabilities, and forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our world.
Yeah.
But it's also been a moment of remarkable resilience, innovation, and compassion. And as we move forward, it's essential to hold on to those lessons learned, to embrace the opportunity for positive change, and to work together to create a future that's worthy of the sacrifices.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's been a pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the initial confusion to the lasting legacies, from the personal impacts to the global implication.
It has been quite a journey.
It has. And as always, we encourage you to keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring. The journey of understanding the pandemic and its implications is far from over.
It's not over.
It's an ongoing process of discovery, reflection, and action.
Thank you for listening.
We'll see you next time.